What's up, fam? So we're going to talk today about the Reformation from the Catholic viewpoint, and we're going to talk about Vatican II because there is like a slight connection with, I don't know if you would say slight connection, but basically John the 23rd saw Trent, and that's what he wanted to happen in Vatican II. So let's go back to the Reformation era. One of my theology professors had called it the era of Christian fragmentation, which I like a lot better because I've also heard the deformation of the church, and I was like, yeah, they did deform the church, because it like caused all these schisms and like how do you say, like, yeah, like this fragmentation of different denominations. But I think that can be kind of an antagonistic term. So I think Christian fragmentation works a lot better in that sense. So you have the era of Christian fragmentation. And I think so often we like to demonize Luther and say, oh, he was so bad, he did this, he caused a lot of hardship. And he did cause fragmentation in the church. But here's basically, I think, what we have to keep in mind, what was going on in the church. So this is, I don't know if you were like me or if this was just me being like ignorant growing up, but I really thought that the selling of indulgences in the Catholic Church was a myth. I thought it was created by the Protestants. Didn't know that it was actually real. But no, like they've got historical documents and such proving this. So basically you have Luther, right, who's this Augustinian monk, and he's severely scrupulous, okay? So basically he felt like he could never do anything right, and he was like trying hard to earn his salvation, and that's a whole nother video. We should do a video on the Constantinian turn, because I think that point in history where Constantine legalized Christianity really has a lot to do with the mindset and culture of Christianity post-martyrdom time, where you have the Christians being martyred in Colosseum. So we got to do a separate video on that. But basically, so you have Luther, who felt like he couldn't do anything right. And if you look at it and you're like, oh, he tore up the church. In a sense, he was definitely an instrument for tearing up the church, unfortunately. You got to admit his heart was in the right place, because he saw the way the church was, and he's like, the church needs reform. And I'm sure he wasn't the only one. The church really did need reform. Basically, if you look at the church from that time in history, and this was 1517 when he nailed his 95 Thesis on the wall, and basically, if you look at the list of the popes that were in the papacy during the life of Luther, you will find that the good popes, the ones that were trying to implement reforms because they recognized that reforms were needed, they were only alive for like a year or so, and then they died, and they weren't able to like really implement anything. They didn't have enough time to get anything done, basically. But the popes who were in the papacy for like 12 years, 13 years, a substantial amount of time, they were all the corrupt ones. The Borgia Pope, Alexander was it the 6th or 7th? I think it was the 7th. The Medici popes, who were basically there for money, and you had like this mafioso stuff going on. So a little background on Alexander the 6th or 7th, pardon me, I forget which one. Some of you may know, some of you may not know. He was probably the worst pope, at least the most infamously bad pope, because he had a mistress. He raised his 18-year-old son, I think it was, either son or grandson, his 18-year-old son to a bishop position. He gave like an annulment to his daughter when her marriage ceased to be financially advantageous. So, and then he secured her marriage to somebody else. So it's like, no, there's so much corruption, and some of these popes are having orgies in the Vatican. It was really bad, okay? And killing people, knocking people off so they can move other people in positions. Really bad stuff. So, and also, yes, once again, the selling of indulgences so as to fund St. Peter's Basilica. So Martin Luther was seeing all this stuff going on, and he was seeing that no one was doing anything to like help and get it back on track. And you had some good saints, don't get me wrong. You had like St. Francis, but that was the 1300s, 12 or 1300s. But basically you have, so Martin Luther saw all of this, and he wanted to implement change. The problem was he probably wasn't the best person to do it because of his severe scrupulosity. And a little background on for those who are not familiar with scrupulosity. It basically means you have a very sensitive conscience. You might see, number one, you might see sin where there is none, thinking that you're committing a sin when you're really not. Or you might see a sin and you know it's a sin, but you raise it to a level that it's not. So let's say it's 60 degrees out. Let's say the sin is 60 degrees. You see it as 85. and you're like, oh my gosh, I committed a mortal sin, I'm going to go to hell, da da da. So you take a venial sin and in your mind it's mortal, and you're so convinced, and this is your reality. I used to struggle really bad with scrupulosity. I think I had it to the point of an OCD. So I'm assuming it was the same for him, because it was like a lifelong thing for this guy. It was not a phase. For a lot of people it's a phase, like when they're teenagers, but his lasted a long time. So yeah, so he was really struggling with that. And the only thing that gave him peace was the fact that he recognized, no, God is my righteousness. And God is our righteousness. You know, like Luther had this tower experience, he calls it, where he was in the tower and he was reading, was it one of the books of St. Paul, where it talks of the righteousness of God. And Luther was like, okay, that makes so much sense. That puts a lot off of my plate. I don't have to earn my salvation and try so hard and trying to be perfect, because I feel like I'm never good enough to go to heaven. And we're not good enough to go to heaven. Like, there's a reason he felt that way. And he was like, so God is our righteousness. And as long as we have God, and as long as we have faith and we have him in our hearts, we can go to heaven. It's like, yeah, but you weren't the first one to discover that. That actually came from St. Augustine. You would think he would have known that being an Augustinian monk, but he didn't. So yeah, so he like, okay, God is our righteousness. And the church does say this. The church does affirm this. God is our righteousness. He is the one who saves us. He's the one who gives us grace to do the right thing. We cannot do it without him, so we cannot save ourselves. We don't earn our salvation. We are called to allow that free flow of grace and cooperate with him. We are called to live out that faith. Basically, so you have the whole Luther thing. So there was a lot going on with that. And that basically what's the word I'm looking for? So that resulted, so he basically fought against what the church was going on, and he nailed his 95 theses. The church looked at it and said, okay, yes to this, no to that, no to that. So they said, like, they affirmed what was good and they rejected what was bad. But at that point, he was kind of already like so gung-ho set on what he believed to be true that he was kind of stubborn on it. And he never wanted to leave the church. He wanted to stay Catholic. He still referred to himself as Catholic for a long time. But after a while, there was just that clash, and it was just not happening. So he did end up leaving the church, and he was excommunicated by the church, obviously. So there was a lot of that going on. But yeah, but the church finally came along with the Council of Trent. And I'm trying to remember, what year did that begin? That was in the 60s? No. That was, I want to say that was, it was during the time when Luther was alive. So Luther wasn't dead yet when they started the Council of Trent, and they started the Trent Reforms. This is where we get the term Tridentine, the Tridentine Mass. The Mass was already in Latin already during this time, but they had instituted some reforms because there were some things going on in the Mass that they're like, we kind of need to clean up a little bit. I think there's too much going on. We need to simplify it. There was a bit of rigidity with how they made it, and the Mass is supposed to be a little, not at all like that. But Ratzinger kind of talks about that. He's like, no spontaneity. Like, this is not a party all about you. This is about Christ. But it was basically, I think they just kind of wanted to bring it in a little more unity, at least. So basically, Trent had a lot of good reforms because there was, you had a lot of bishops who were not presiding in their diocese. They were, let's say you have the Archdiocese of Detroit, and instead of Archbishop Vigneron living in Detroit, as he does now, he's off living in Tuscany, Italy. And he's got this beautiful estate, and he loves to just stay there. And basically, he's not watching over his flock. He's not watching over his priests and making sure that they're all on board, they're all teaching Catholic doctrine. Basically, in that case, he would not be doing his job. So, but for them, the bishops liked that, because they were like, oh, well, I can have multiple dioceses and bring in all the money from the diocese and all the tithing, and I can just live in my fancy estate in Tuscany. And the church was like, no, you have a job to do. You are entrusted with a mission. You are the successor to one of the apostles. This is not about you. This is not about your money and your fancy living. Go do your job. So Trent said, basically, you are going to live in your diocese and do your work. So that was one of the Trent reforms, which was really great. It also talked about the Eucharist and I think, what was it, the sacraments. It didn't institute the sacraments, but it was very clear on which ones were sacraments. And I think this is where, if I'm not mistaken, this is where the marriage came in. Not marriage, but they said matrimony is one of the sacraments. They clarified that, yeah, matrimony is one of the sacraments. Also, one of the things they did that was really cool is there was a lot of disorganization with marriage going on. People were just marrying each other and there was not a priest present, and that was just how it was done for a long time. But this caused a lot of confusion because let's say someone came with a complaint and they're like, they've been cheating on me, they had no intention of staying faithful to me, I want an annulment. The church would be like, we don't have any records that you're married to this person. So the church now is a lot more organized, has records, baptismal certificates, marriage certificates, so they can check basically that you were married to this person, these were the circumstances. So it was basically, in creating these reforms, it created a lot more. They said, like, you have to have a priest present, it needs to be in front of the Eucharist, different things like that, to just kind of bring more clarity to each situation so that there was less gaps, if you will, creating confusion. So that was a great thing. So there was a lot of reforms. Skip to Vatican II. We're going to do like a big jump here.